Hello, I'm Anthony David Hobbs, and this is my movie review of the 2004 film Star Trek Generations. And, well, I'll be honest, the first time I saw it I thought it was pretty awful, but over the years I've warmed to it a bit. It's not quite as awful as people make out. I mean, yes, it is a bad Star Trek film, but it could have been a lot worse. Anyway, basically, the first thing that disappointed me when I first saw it in the cinema was the way it was advertised. I was expecting Kirk and Picard to be like the lead characters throughout the film. But no, Kirk is barely in it at all. No, that's a bit lame, yeah. And apparently the original idea was get the original crew, and they're in like the first half of the film or something, and then slowly the story welds into Next Generation and becomes like a Next Generation film, like that. So it's, sort of brings the two together. But no, because only half the original cast agreed to do the film, and only for a very limited time as well. They're barely in it at all. So the project was doomed from the start. They should have just gone, oh, the hell with that, and do a totally different story. But no, they thought, okay, we've got Captain Kirk. He's agreed to do a limited day of shooting. That'll have to do, basically. Yeah, so it's very lackluster, And it does give what it promised to do. Kirk gets to meet Picard, but only for like the last quarter of the film, a very short part, yeah. And Star Trek Generations, yes, you're disappointed because that's what you're expecting, and then you get that. But also, was it ever a good idea to do a Star Trek, a Next Generation film with the originals? Because, well, I'll tell you what I mean. In Star Trek 6, we see how the Klingon War ended. We also see Commander Worf's grandfather, so it links the original with the events of Next Generation. Then they decide to do a movie called Star Trek Generations that links the original with Next Generation. Didn't we just do that? We've just done that in Star Trek 6. Why would we need to do that again? Yeah. And this is the last time we see the Enterprise D, its last adventure, yeah. And the thing is, Captain Kirk sometimes regrets being a Starfleet captain because, of course, he missed out, didn't get married and have kids, And we see, him talking about that when he's inside the Ribbon Nexus, And to some extent, Captain Picard sort of regrets, not settling down and having kids and all that. Wait a minute. In the original Star Trek Enterprise, they don't have kids on board ship. But in the new Enterprise, Enterprise D, they do bring their kids on board ship. Yes, they bring them with them. So in other words, you can have both. You can be a Starfleet officer and have kids, yeah. So what's stopping Captain Picard having kids? If he regrets not having kids, why doesn't he do it? He can have both, yeah. And then apparently, we find out his brother and his niece and nephews, that they've all been killed in a fire, burned to death, and therefore it's his responsibility to carry on the Picard line. So does he do it? Does he get married? No, he doesn't, no. So we never expand on that. He remains single, so that's a bit stupid. There's nothing stopping him continuing the Picard line, but he doesn't anyway. Okay, some positive things about the film. Well, it does deliver on special effects, yes. The Nexus ribbon's really impressive, great action sequences and everything, even though they cheaped out a bit on the Klingon spaceship exploding. And there are some very funny bits with Commander Data, yes, the emotion chip. He's fascinated by the concept of a drink that tastes disgusting. That's quite funny. And when he brings up a subject about a joke with Geordi LaForge, a joke that was 7 years ago, that's quite funny because Data doesn't seem to understand. You don't randomly bring up a subject that's nothing to do with anything, but he doesn't understand because he's an android. So yes, there are some funny moments, yes. The bit when the Enterprise separates and the saucer section crashes on the planet, that's quite impressive. Yeah, really great action sequence. So yeah, it's not all bad. There are some good things. But the ribbon, the Nexus, you go inside it, you live forever, and you're ageless. Wait a minute, isn't that like the plot of Star Trek V, Finding the Planet Heaven, where you live forever? The fans didn't like that, so why are they doing a similar story here? It's really rather silly, yeah. Will they never learn? Anyway, but the Star Trek Next Generation, great TV show, but they can't really do films that well. Yes, I mean, how often do you see original Star Trek films on TV? Lots and lots of times. How often do you see Next Generation films? Or barely ever at all, yeah. And also, Star Trek Next Generation cancelled in May of 1994. A movie is released in November of 1994. Well, that's silly. That's much too soon, yeah. The original Star Trek film, the first ever one, was years after the show. So they had plenty of time to develop and, make it movie-worthy, If you do it much too soon, that's silly because it'll look just like a long episode of the show, which it does. There are some parts where you think you're watching the TV show. Yeah, it's like a long episode of the show. So it was clearly a very rushed project. It needed more time, more development. We see the Klingons in this one again. Now, don't get me wrong, the Klingons are very popular villains. They're quite cool, except they're the villains in Star Trek 3, the villains in Star Trek 5, the villains in Star Trek 6, and in Star Trek 7 we see Klingons again. For goodness sake, can we please see some villains other than them, I don't think anyone's going to forget they're here, we know the Klingon bird of prey. But I guess they were put in because they thought that's what the fans want, yeah. And something else, on a philosophical note here. Dr. Sauron, played brilliantly by Malcolm McDowell, he wants to change the trajectory of the ribbon, and it will result in the deaths of millions of people. It will destroy a planet. But Captain Picard says, even if it didn't destroy millions of people, you can't do it anyway, because you're not allowed to live forever. Well, what's it to him? Yeah, if it is Dr. Sauron's decision to go and live forever, isn't that up to him? It's not up to Picard. What Picard is deciding who can and can't live forever. Who does he think he is? God? But anyway, I digress. Captain Kirk dies at the end. He decides to come out of the Nexus and make a difference, and he does. He dies a hero because he helped the mission to save millions of people. And yes, he finally dies after all these life-threatening missions he's been in. He finally dies, and it's very solemn when Captain Picard buries him under all those rocks, yeah. But there were books that were set after the events of the Star Trek Generations in which he's brought back to life. Now that's stupid and silly because Kirk didn't die on a Genesis planet. How can he come back to life? It's more ludicrous than the plot of Star Trek Generations, yeah. But if you want to ignore the books, ignore the Star Trek expanded universe, you can go, no, Captain Kirk died in Star Trek Generations. That's the way it should be. Because if he comes back to life, it cheapens his death. It's so silly, yeah. But there we are, I mean, sometimes it works and bring character back to life, sometimes it doesn't. Anyway, so to sum it all up, oh yeah, and why is it the Star Trek Next Generation film, half the uniforms are the same in the show, the other half are like in DS9? That's a bit silly, yeah. In other words, Star Trek Generations was a project that was very rushed, yeah. And half the original crew would only do it for a limited time because the actors refused. In other words, like other Star Trek films, the events that happen are mirrored with stuff that was going on in real life. Half the actors didn't want to do it, so that's why we only see half the original crew. Anyway, Star Trek Generations had potential, but yes, a lot of bits could have been done better. Okay, thank you for watching. I'm Anthony Hobbs, and I'm never bored.